Ma'am, I need to see identification right now. I already told you I have a hearing in 20 minutes. That's not what I asked. ID. Now. On what legal basis are you detaining me? I'm asking for identification. Then you can speak to court security. I'm going to my chambers. Hey.
So we're diving into a wild story today. It's about a totally routine morning at a federal courthouse that just spirals into this huge, historic legal showdown. And, it all kicked off with just 3 simple words.
Hey, stop right there. Just imagine hearing that. But you're not on the street, it's not a traffic stop. You're in the marble lobby of one of the most secure buildings in the entire country. The time is exactly 8:43 a.m. on a Wednesday, and the air is thick with tension. So that's the big question, right? Who's being told to stop? And what on earth could they have possibly done to get confronted by federal agents right inside what's supposed to be their own workplace?
Okay, so let's set the scene. We are at the Sandra Day O'Connor U.S. Courthouse in Phoenix. I mean, this place is a 10-story monument to federal authority. It's a space where every single detail is designed to project power and order.
And this is where we meet our key players, 2 ICE agents, Marcus Duval and Benjamin Reeves. They're there because they got a tip about an undocumented worker in the building. And, they believe they have every right to be there.
But, and this is a big but, they've made a really, really bad miscalculation. See, the person they decided to stop was not just any employee, not even close.
The woman they stopped, the one they were raising their voices at, was United States District Court Judge Imani Caldwell. Think about that. She wasn't just some random employee in the building. In a very real sense, she was the authority in that building. And just look at the sheer weight of her background here. A Yale Law graduate, a former federal prosecutor with an incredible 84% conviction rate. She was appointed to the federal bench when she was just 41, and she'd been working in this very courthouse for 6 years. Heck, her own father was a civil rights attorney who marched with Dr. King. This isn't just a resume, it's a legacy.
So this is where it all comes to a head. It's this collision between 2 very different things. On one side, you have the legal reality of who actually has power inside a federal courthouse. And on the other, you have the personal assumptions these agents brought with them that morning.
And this is the moment everything just explodes. After Judge Caldwell identifies herself and literally points to the judicial robe she's wearing, this was Agent Duval's response. Anyone can put on a robe. Wow. That statement is just dripping with dismissal. It turns a procedural check into a really personal confrontation.
Let's just break down how flimsy the agent's logic was here. On one side, you have their whole case, which is based on this super vague tip about a black woman. But then you look at the actual reality. She was wearing judicial robes, she had just badged in with her judicial credentials, the security system itself logged her entry by name and title, Judge I. Caldwell. The evidence against their assumption was, well, overwhelming.
And this brings us to the absolute legal heart of this whole story, jurisdiction. See, the agents were basically operating in a space where their authority wasn't what they thought it was. In a federal courthouse, the U.S. Marshals are in charge, period. ICE can't just waltz in and start doing their thing without getting the Marshals okay first. And that's exactly when U.S. Marshal Taryn Bogles shows up. Now, this guy is a 12-year veteran. He knows Judge Caldwell, but more importantly, he knows the rules. He doesn't even ask questions. He just states a fact, laying down the law and making it crystal clear that these agents have crossed a very, very serious line.
That one confrontation, which only lasted a few minutes, set off a chain reaction that moved at an incredible speed. And the consequences? They were completely and totally unprecedented. First, let's just talk about the money. A $6.8 million settlement. That number, all by itself, tells you just how severe of a civil rights violation the government admitted had happened here. And just look at how fast everything escalated. The confrontation starts at 8:43 in the morning. By about 10:15, so within 90 minutes, the highest levels of federal law enforcement, we're talking the DOJ, DHS, U.S. Marshals, they're all notified. And the resolution wasn't just some slap on the wrist. Nope, both agents were fired. They ended up facing a historic federal prosecution. Their careers, over.
So, after all that, what's the big takeaway from this whole dramatic series of events? Well, it really all boils down to a fundamental misunderstanding of power.
It really just comes down to this single sentence. Agent Duval confused jurisdiction with authority, and he confused assumption with evidence. And you know what? That one moment of confusion cost him absolutely everything.
And this whole thing leaves us with one final, really important question to think about. The agents kept saying they were just doing their jobs, but this story shows a very clear line was crossed. So it forces us to ask, where is that line? And what happens when the very people we trust with authority forget who really holds the ultimate power inside the halls of justice?
Picture this, a federal courthouse, a sitting judge, still in her robes, and two federal agents who are absolutely convinced she's someone else. What happens next? Well, it's not just some simple mix-up. It's a full-blown confrontation that spirals into a multi-million-dollar federal case. So let's break down exactly how this went so wrong so fast. But before we even get into the nitty-gritty of what happened that morning, let's just start with the aftermath. Because the fallout from this encounter was, to put it mildly, swift, severe, and had massive consequences for everyone involved. The first consequence? A check for $6.8 million. That is a truly staggering settlement for a civil rights violation based on an unlawful stop. It just goes to show you how seriously the government took what went down. And it wasn't just about the money. For the agents at the center of this, it was career-ending. Both of them were fired, their careers in federal law enforcement just gone, all because of a confrontation that lasted only a few minutes. So that's the big question, right? How on earth does a routine Wednesday morning inside a secure federal building escalate so completely, so dramatically? To figure that out, we have to go back to the very beginning. All right, let's rewind. The time is 8:43 in the morning, and we're in the lobby of the Phoenix Federal Courthouse. This is where two ICE agents, who are acting on a tip about an undocumented worker, decide to confront a woman heading for the elevator. That woman, as they were about to find out, was Judge Amani Caldwell. And you have to understand, the woman they stopped wasn't just anybody. She's a sitting U.S. District Court judge. Before that, a top federal prosecutor with an 84% conviction rate, a Yale law graduate, and her father was a civil rights attorney in Birmingham. So to say she knows the law is a massive understatement. And get this, she's in her own workplace, a place she's worked for 6 years. She's literally wearing her judicial robes, and she had just swiped her own credentials to get past security. The system itself had already confirmed exactly who she was. But despite all of that, Agent Marcus Duval walks right up to her and demands to see her ID. And this is where the whole thing starts to go off the rails, as the judge tries to explain who she is, and the agent just refuses to listen. Now this is where you see two totally different worlds collide. The agent is demanding compliance, but the judge, she responds with a very calm, very precise legal question. On what legal basis are you stopping me? It's a question that cuts right to the heart of the entire problem. And then comes the line, the one that just throws gasoline on the fire. Anyone can put on a robe. With that single, incredibly dismissive comment, Agent Duval isn't just questioning who she is anymore. He's challenging her authority in her own building. And right after that statement, this was no longer just a verbal argument. Things were about to get physical. So Agent Duval, he doesn't back off. First, he actually physically puts himself between her and the elevator. Then, he reaches for the zip ties on his belt, which is a clear signal that he's thinking about arresting her. But through all of this, Judge Caldwell just stands her ground. She refuses to be intimidated. And that's when she uses the most powerful tool she has in that building. It's not an argument, it's not a legal brief, it's just a single word spoken with the full authority of her office. Marshal. This is the exact moment the agent's assumed power is about to crash into actual legal authority. And this brings us to the absolute core of the legal issue here. It's all about jurisdiction. You know, who actually has police power inside a federal courthouse? It's a lesson these two agents were about to learn the hard way. So when Agent Duval tries to claim he has the authority to conduct immigration enforcement right there in the lobby, Deputy Marshal Taryn Bolake arrives and shuts him down with 4 simple words that just completely dismantle the agent's entire case. Not here, you don't. So why was the marshal so certain? Well, it's because of this key principle. Inside a federal courthouse, one agency and one agency only has the final say, the U.S. Marshal Service. Any other agency, and that includes ICE, needs explicit prior permission from the chief judge to conduct any kind of enforcement action. Permission they did not have. And just as this whole thing is unfolding, guess who else walks into the lobby? Another federal judge, Adrian Lawson, a colleague of Judge Caldwell's. She sees the commotion and she knows instantly that this is something very, very serious. Now, when the agents tried to explain themselves, they claimed Judge Caldwell matched a description. But look at what that description actually was. A female, African-American, who works in the building. I mean, that is so ridiculously vague, it could apply to dozens of people. The reality, meanwhile, was specific, verifiable, and standing right in front of them. And Judge Lawson, she doesn't mince words. She cuts right through the nonsense and calls it exactly what it is. And hearing that accusation, that's racial profiling, coming from another federal judge, well, it just hangs in the air and gives a name to the assumption that started this whole mess. So now you've got security, a U.S. Marshal, and 2 federal judges on the scene. For these agents, their entire unauthorized operation is just completely collapsing in on itself. The system itself was now responding, and fast. And then the building's chief security officer shows up, and he asks the one question that ends the whole thing. It goes right back to that rule of jurisdiction. He looks at them and asks, point blank, who authorized your presence? What he's really asking is, which one of the head judges gave you permission to be here? Agent Duvall has no answer. He just stands there, silent. And really, his silence was the only answer needed. It confirmed everything. They had no warrant, no authorization from the chief judge, and absolutely zero jurisdiction. They overstepped their authority in probably the worst place you possibly could. And the official response moved at light speed. Within just 90 minutes of that first confrontation, the highest levels of government were looped in. We're talking the chief judge, the Department of Justice, Homeland Security. They all knew. The wheels of accountability were already turning. In the end, this whole incident is just a powerful case study, and it leaves us with a really critical question to think about. In any system, really, what happens when someone's assumption of power, whether it comes from a badge, a uniform, or just plain prejudice, collides with the documented legal reality of authority? Well, in this courthouse, on this day, the answer was a $6.8 million lesson.